I'm going to do a quick check. I think we are live. Give me a second. Yes, we are live. Welcome to Namaste Debate. My name is Mani Nair. Today, I'll be having conversation with Luisa. I just want to say, few good things about her, but I will allow her to speak more about herself. She is a reporter and columnist with Waterloo Region Record newspaper, and she writes on a lot of things affecting people's day-to-day life and politics. And she also covered Namaste Debate when we started Namaste Debate. So welcome to Namaste Debate, Luisa. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well. Thank you, Mani. Thank you for the kind introduction. So I am an immigrant to Canada from the United States, and I was born in New York City. My mother was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and my father was born in New York City also to Italian immigrants. So the immigrant experience is one that I identify with very strongly. And I went to journalism school in New York City and married a Canadian. I worked in Winnipeg at the Winnipeg Tribune, which doesn't exist anymore. I worked at the London Free Press briefly and for 2 years at the St. Catharines Standard before coming to Kitchener-Waterloo to the Record. And I've been at the Record since 1984, which is a very long time. But I love newspapers. I love the way that newspapers facilitate debate and discussion in the community, and the way that I love the trusted position that newspapers have. Of course, they have to earn that trust from the community, but I think it's very important these days to have a source of trusted, objective, factually based information. And right now, since 2011, I've been a full-time columnist for the Record. I do a few little other things like copy editing and that kind of thing, but anything I write is usually an opinion column, and it's marked that way. But the reporters at the Record write stories based on the facts only, and you're not supposed to tell from reading the story what the reporter thinks. And that principle is really at the heart of trusted journalism. And when I look around and I see how difficult it is for people today to trust information that they get, I feel it's very important to have a source of information that people believe and trust. So I feel it's a very privileged life to be working for a newspaper. I'm very grateful
for me. Yeah. Like you said, integrity, honesty. Right now, a lot of countries, we see a lot of fake news. Information are being manipulated, but I don't see that much happening in Canada, and it's all because of journalists like you. You have integrity. You write what you see. It's not your opinion in general as such, right?
Yes, we're very lucky in Canada to enjoy a healthy democracy, and I think we should never take it for granted here.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so if you're ready, we can start. I just wanted to just give you high level how we're going to do this. We'll talk about pandemic in general, vaccination. We'll talk about the federal and the provincial responses.
Sure.
And we'll talk a little bit about municipal policies.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll end the conversation. We'll go with the flow. I'm expecting probably an hour. So if you're ready, I can start with my first question.
Yeah, I am ready. And I thought the questions that you suggested were very, very interesting. So I'm sure it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my first question is, how has pandemic impacted your life, and how have you been able to adapt and adjust to the new way of life?
So my life personally, you mean, or?
In general, overall, yeah. What you see and what your personal experience is.
Right. So my own experience has been that my life has not changed that much. Even though I am I have two jobs, actually. I work for the Record, as we've just described, and I'm also part-time the executive director of the Grand Philharmonic Choir, which is a choir of 100 adults and almost 100 children and youth that perform. So that has really changed. because we
Mhm.
cannot have performances indoors. As a reporter and columnist and copy editor, I just took my computer home and my cell phone home, and I work from home. And I'm out when I need to be out, but I can do a lot of what I do, especially because what I do is about ideas and discussions and different ideas about how things should happen. You can easily get that information by talking to someone online, by phoning them, by sending emails back and forth. So my life, although it's much more focused at home, my work hasn't really changed. In terms of my life, I'm spending a lot more time at home. So my cats and I are getting to know each other much better than before. I have a
Right.
couple of children who are in their 20s and 30s. And
Okay.
my son came to live with me for a while. Now he's got his own place in Kitchener. But
Mhm.
we got to know each, because my life was more home based and focused on home. I've really been able to build those relationships,
Mhm.
and I've never felt disconnected. But it's because, luckily for me, everything that I do all day is still about talking about what should happen here, what should happen there. People have different ideas about what the best way to do things is,
Mhm.
and that doesn't change for me. I still feel connected to the community, even though I'm not out there as much, and nobody is out there as much.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it's been for me. I know for many people it's been very, very distressing, and
Mhm.
I've known people who have had mental health difficulties because of the isolation and the loneliness, and I think that's really, really hard for
Mhm.
us. I hope that when the pandemic retreats a little bit and we get control of it a little bit better, we will we will put what we've learned into making a better society. One of
Mhm.
the things I think that we've learned is how important it is to not be isolated and not let others
Okay.
be isolated.
I think now from now onwards, we'll cherish each and every moment that we live, right?
Yes. One real difficulty for me, for example, and this is something that's really affected my personal life. I didn't know how personal you wanted to get, but I have an elderly mother who lives in New York State.
Mhm.
So she's just north of
Oh, okay.
Syracuse, New York, near the Lake Ontario, southern shore of Lake Ontario.
Mhm.
And it's been very difficult for me to go and see her and help her. She's in her
Oh.
mid 80s. She has Alzheimer's disease. She's in rapid decline from that. And I have some other sisters for other reasons. Many of them cannot travel. So
Mhm.
I'm one of the key people that looks after her, takes her to appointments, make sure she doesn't get lonely.
Right.
Just make sure that the people who we've hired to be in there every day are doing a good job. And it's becoming more and more difficult for me to go and see her. I
Mhm.
really miss her. I know she doesn't have much time left on this earth. And the pandemic has, I've been a few times and come back and stayed in my home for 2 weeks. But now, with it being, I haven't been there since the beginning of the year because there was a stay home order and so many people were getting so anxious about travel. And I quite understand that. These variants coming in. Um, we don't want each other to travel. That's clear, and I
Mhm.
need to do my part. But it's so difficult to not be with her because I'll phone her up, but she doesn't really want to talk. She wants to be with people. That's hard.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's hard for anyone with loved ones in another country. And one of the
Mhm.
things that's so interesting is people people think that either you're a truck driver who has to come in and out, or you're going on vacation. But
Mhm.
those of us with ties to other lands know better. We know that there are people that we might not ever see again. There are funerals. There are, properties that you have to go and do legal work for, all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
That's
you're right.
essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings me to the next question. You already answered some of them. Do you like what is the worst outcome of this pandemic? Some of the things you already mentioned. Do you want to elaborate on that? Other than we see a lot of deaths happening. Like you said, your mother's concern, right? She's far
Mhm.
away, and Do you want
Yeah.
to elaborate on that? Yeah.
Yes, yes, there's lots of things. So I think one of the really interesting things that this pandemic has done is it's scraped away the surface of society and revealed all these really bad problems that we had that have gotten worse because of the pandemic. So for example, the way people are looked after in long-term care homes, they don't get the proper amount of attention. They don't have a good end to their life in some of these homes, even when the staff are really caring. Just the amount of money that the government allocates for the care of some of these people who are very elderly and sick is not enough. We know that people who have who work in healthcare but don't make very much money or aren't part of a strong union, when they get sick, they don't get paid, so they come to work sick. And of course, in
Mhm.
the pandemic, that has been a terrible thing, and it has helped spread disease and kill people. So we know now that we have treated these people badly, and we need to have paid sick days for everybody
Mhm.
so that we don't spread diseases. And maybe it was bad with the flu, but it's become catastrophic with the pandemic because the
Right.
pandemic is so much worse. So a lot of, and then there's the isolation, which I think has been really awful for people on a number of levels. So all of these different things I think have meant we see how terribly it's treated us, but there is an opportunity to fix the problems that it has shown us. It's almost like a curtain has been drawn and
Mhm.
shown us all the really bad things about our society. There are
No,
many
like
good things,
yeah.
but some of
Mhm.
these things are not good.
No, like you said, the long term care. Previously politicians used to fight over deficit spending and all that. Now I wonder after pandemic where this billion trillions are coming. So it's not about money. Money we create money. It's just the pure
Hmm.
intention and priorities of the government, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right,
I mean,
right now we're just spending billion. Yeah.
I've seen that the International Monetary Fund is taking note that many countries are in a large amount of deficit right now, Canada included. But
Yeah.
even the International Monetary Fund is saying countries should be spending so that people will be able to get through this time when people can't work, don't have an income, and so that we can get to the other end. They should be spending money on social welfare. And so it's very unusual for the International Monetary Fund to take that kind of stand, but they have. So that's something to bear in mind.
Interesting thing is if you look world around, regardless whether the government is liberal or conservative,
Yeah.
everybody has become socialist now. Give money. There is no other option. Is this the time to spend money? And for the care, right? So there is no conservative in that way. There is nobody saying, cuts. Even the
You're
conservative
absolutely
governments are
right.
saying spend, right?
And having been born in New York City and identifying as American as I do, I have US citizenship. I've never renounced it.
Okay.
That means that I look at that country too, even though I don't live there anymore and I
Right.
haven't lived
Yeah.
there in decades. There's still a warm feeling in my heart, and that's where many of my family lives.
Mhm.
So, but I look at how difficult it has been for the United States with their decentralized government and their lack of, they don't really respect or obey the government as much as Canadians do. It's a
Correct. Yeah.
different culture. They're
Right.
suspicious of the government, and their whole country is being based on that.
Mhm.
So when the government says you've got to wear a mask and you can't go out and you can't do this and you can't do that, Americans tend, not all Americans everywhere, but as a rule, sorry, I've got a complaining cat.
No
Um,
problem. Take your time.
as a rule, Americans have tended to not, and they've tended to not do what they're told. And also, everything is based on the individual states. So one state will have strict rules and another state will not. And so that has really, I think, been problematic for Americans. And I think it's been good for us where the government says, you've all got to do this, and we're going to give you the money, you've all got to stay home, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And we tend to be more obedient. And in a pandemic, that's a good thing. It isn't always a good thing to do whatever the government says, but right now it is, in my opinion.
One interesting thing I'm finding, I may be wrong, but what I see in the US model of healthcare system is, when compared to Canada, I think this pandemic is a very good example. I feel that when we have the centralized model of universal care managed by the government, it's
Yeah,
much more easier to do the messaging and control to some extent. In the US model is decentralized and privatization.
yeah.
So the pandemic wasn't handled the way we want it. But when it comes to vaccination, it's a totally different story compared to US and Canada. So my next question is related to the vaccination. How do you rate Canada when it comes to the vaccination rollout? Like, what do you think?
Well, that is actually a perfect subject to lead from the last subject, because Canada has Medicare. And so we generally tend to think that we're better off than the United States because we have medical care for everyone and nobody has to pay for it out of pocket. Okay, that's fine, but that creates some problems for us when it comes to things like vaccines, because the United States has a privatized system. They the drug prices there are whatever the market will bear. And if you're Pfizer, or if you're a drug company, there's a bunch of things. One of them is, if you're a drug company, of course you're going to sell your drugs to the person who's going to pay the most for them. And that's one reason that, even though I hear CNN is always complaining about that the vaccination rate isn't as high as it should be, it's a
Yeah.
lot higher than ours is.
Correct. Yeah.
One thing. And another thing is that the United States has manufacturing capability in its own country. So Canada cannot get any of the Pfizer vaccines that are manufactured in the United States. In the same way, we couldn't get the personal protective equipment at the beginning of the pandemic that was manufactured in the United States, even when we ordered it.
Mhm.
The shipments were canceled because Trump wanted it for Americans, and
Right.
Biden is no different.
Yeah.
This whole term vaccine nationalism, one of the things that's happened is, one of the reasons Canada has a problem is there is not vaccine manufacturing capacity in this country beyond a couple of plants that make the flu vaccine.
Mhm.
So we're building a plant, but it's not going to be ready until 2022. So we can't really wait until then for our vaccines. So we're trying to buy from plants in other countries, but we're not paying as much. And we don't have any ability to keep it for ourselves. We're trying to get what other countries don't want for themselves. That's one reason I think we're so far behind in the line.
Mhm.
50 years ago, we did have very, very well equipped laboratories for vaccines,
Mhm.
and they were sold. They were
Mhm.
they were private, and they were sold off to other countries, companies in other countries. So we no
Mhm.
longer have that. I think one of the things about the pandemic too is it has shown us the problems associated with global free trade,
Correct.
right? Because if we are now saying to ourselves, we must be able to manufacture our own personal protective equipment. Doug Ford said that. He said, we're never going to let ourselves be put in this position again. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had people in Waterloo Region making masks out of bed sheets for people who didn't, because we couldn't get masks. Remember that? And we
Yeah.
had we had people who make whiskey and distilled spirits, and they were making hand sanitizer because we
Right.
couldn't get those things. And so I think we're not going to let ourselves be put in such a vulnerable position again. And I hope that the leader of the country decides that we need to be able to take care of ourselves for certain life-saving functions.
Yeah. I think I always believe, when there is a crisis, this is the best time to show your leadership.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
And,
So,
right.
I mean, I don't blame Prime Minister I'm not crazy about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. There's
Mhm.
lots of things I don't like about what he does, but I
Mhm.
don't really blame him for our vaccine problems,
Mhm.
because that was a problem that was created in the 1980s, long ago, when
Mhm.
those laboratories were sold under,
Mhm.
I think, the Mulroney government in the 1980s. So
Mhm.
this is just how we've evolved in the global free trade. Like,
Mhm.
if lots of wood and oil were going to help us survive the pandemic, and we were going to be selling that to everybody else, we'd be great. We'd be doing great.
Yeah.
But
So
that's not. Yeah.
one thing I feel that the government could have done was, the lockdown time, right? So I always believe, lockdown was a time when, because we know vaccination is not there, so it's better to keep people at home. But they
Yeah.
could have used this buffer time to build capacity.
Yes, and actually, I was reading some things about that. It's interesting you say that, because there were some lobbyists who contacted the Canadian government and said, "We can, we can work with such and such a company to get this for you, or we can build a plant right now for it."
Mhm. Mhm.
And there were some problems with the way the government responded. The federal and what I was reading, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who wrote the article, but I think it was either in the Economist or the Globe and Mail, and they were saying that the federal government isn't very good at buying equipment and supplies, because it's usually, except for the military, it's usually the provincial governments that do that. So they just don't have the expertise. And they apparently were sending these lobbyists who were trying to help them secure supplies of the vaccine. They were sending them to a website, and the lobbyists were saying, no, you have to create, it has to be a person-to-person meeting. You can't be sending us to a website. Yeah. So it's and there was a situation where a private company wanted to help build vaccine capacity, and the government decided to go with the public sector to do it, and it's slower in the public sector. Everything in the public sector is slower. Sorry about the sounds. That's my email going crazy.
No problem. Take your time.
Yeah. No, it's just I can't turn off that sound without turning off this sound.
Okay. No problem. So we talked about vaccination, and we talked that compared US with Canada. Today I was reading the amount of vaccination US is doing on a daily basis. Canada must have done for the whole so far, like overall in Canada.
Yeah.
That's a scale they are doing, right? It's all because of manufacturing, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of it. Yeah, that's part of it. And also because Canada doesn't. The other thing, I actually interviewed a really interesting pharmacy professor at University of Waterloo about this very subject, and she said one of the problems for Canada is it has low drug prices, that it will pay for drugs, because some of our drug pricing is public. Like, for example, flu vaccines are given out. Government buys those en masse, for example. But vaccines for people who are on public health programs like Ontario Works, and elderly people get their drugs through a government drug plan. But she said that otherwise Canada doesn't have the money to really pay high prices, and they don't buy in bulk because other countries have pharmacare for everyone in the country.
Correct.
So, for example, if we lived in Holland or the UK, your drugs would be part of Medicare. It would be part of socialized medicine, and that means the government has enormous buying power. So not only do we not manufacture our own vaccines, but it's hard for us to buy vaccines because we don't have either high prices or big buying, big orders. So that's part of our problem.
So do you think the NDP proposal for pharmacare, is that this will solve that issue, or do you think it's something different from what we're talking about?
Well, I think it's interesting how we have free healthcare for some parts of our body, but not others. Like drugs are not on. You can go to the emergency room and you won't get a bill, but if you need antibiotics, then you'll have to pay for that. Many of us. If you want dental or eye care, that's not part of Medicare. So I don't think that makes sense. But on the other hand, when we come out of the pandemic, there is going to be a huge deficit to reckon with. So we have to decide what matters to us. What are we going to spend our money on? Is it going to be pharmacare? Is it going to be more care for the elderly in long-term care homes? Is it going to be something to, rebuild childcare, because childcare has been ravaged during this pandemic, as people haven't been able to use childcare. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the government makes its priorities when this is all over.
Okay. So that brings to the next question. How long will it take before things go back to normal, according to you, pre-COVID level?
Oh, well, I think not only does everybody have to be vaccinated, but everybody has to be confident in the vaccine. And those are two different things. We don't really know very much about how these vaccines work. I was just listening this morning to an interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci, whose name will be familiar.
Right.
And he was saying that some countries are just giving one dose when it's a dose and then a booster. Some countries are just giving one dose and saying one dose is enough. And he was saying we don't really know how that vaccine, how much how robust that vaccine is going to be if you only give the one dose. We don't know if that's going to really protect you. It might protect you for a while, but then the protection will ebb away. And there are so many questions about how these vaccines are going to work. Will they work against the variants that are coming up? Will the virus morph and change itself into something much stronger or something much weaker? We haven't seen this play out yet. So I would think that it will be at least 2022 before we all get back in. And I also, again, one of my sources of information is The Economist magazine. Been reading it since I was in high school.
Right.
And they had a big map of when everybody's going to be vaccinated in every country. And I saw with interest that they said for Canada that would be 2022, not 2021. So I would say maybe by early 2022, people will start having the confidence to gather again, go to concerts and lectures and, hockey games and all the things that we love to do.
Yeah, I think that's a realistic way of saying, 2022. But economy-wise, I still feel that probably it'll take at least 5 years to stabilize.
Yes. Yeah. So then we have an economy that might be under a lot of strain by then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
there'll be something else coming, then we'll talk about deficit spending.
yeah.
It goes
Yeah.
on, it's a chain, right?
Well, and expectations will be very high because a lot of people have been very badly affected by the pandemic, and they will expect the government to take care of the problem, whatever it is. And, there's going to be a lot of calls on the government's resources. So whoever's in charge is going to have a very difficult job.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're talking about pandemic. So the last question under that section that I want to ask is, what would be the first thing you would like to do once the pandemic is over?
Well, I'd like to go and see my mother without having to take 3 COVID tests and be locked in a hotel on the way home.
Right.
I'd like to, as I said to you earlier, I manage a choir, and I really miss singing with the other people in the choir. And singing has been thought of as a pretty dangerous thing to do. So we've only been kind of meeting online, but it would be so nice to gather with everybody outdoors somewhere and just sing together. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to being able to visit my son without wearing 2 masks and standing 6 feet apart I'm looking forward to giving my son a hug. And I'm looking forward to being able to fly to Ireland where my daughter lives and visiting her. Yeah. I haven't seen her in maybe a year. It's a very long time.
So you'll be basically traveling more, right?
Traveling and singing and hugging and doing the things that we love to do.
Right.
Go to a movie in a movie house, listening to everybody around me laughing at the fun stuff that's happening in the movie. That feeling of the social context of things. You can watch a movie on your computer, but it's not the same as being with other people who are feeling the same ups and downs as you are while you're watching the movie. Not the same at all. Same thing with a concert. I love classical music. I go and hear the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony. I miss hearing them. I love the center and the square. It feels like my second home. I'll be looking forward to going back in there.
So how is the people who are in this musical choir, like, is this a voluntary thing they're doing, or this is more of a bread and butter kind of?
Oh, no, nobody gets paid.
Okay.
No, we sing because we love it.
No.
And we perform at Center in the Square, and in local other venues like churches or like Wilfrid Laurier University has a Maureen Forrester Theatre. We've performed in there as well. Sometimes we perform in the woods. It just depends what kind of concert it is. And we meet each week. We rehearse. We produce concerts. People come to hear them. Sometimes they're free. Sometimes you have to buy a ticket. But it's about the origins of this community in the early 19th century were very strong on singing. The Mennonites and Germans, who were the first European-based settlers to be here, did a lot of singing, and they used to have things called Sängerfest in the late 19th century here in Kitchener-Waterloo, where thousands of people would come to sing together. So the choir that I run is celebrating in 2022 its 100th anniversary.
No, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the oldest arts group in the region. I'm not sure. I'm still doing my research.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just people who love to sing coming together and doing that.
Yeah.
That's a long answer to a short question.
I
Sorry.
think it'll be nice to do a little bit more marketing of what the group you represent, right? So
Hmm?
because a lot of people may not even know about it, right?
No.
Other than people who have been here for long, right?
Well, it depends. Like a lot of the things that we sing are uh, choral music in the European tradition, and a lot of that is Christian worship music. So if you go to a Christian church, you're more likely to know about it than if you don't.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I like the core music. I love it.
Oh, good. Well, I'll get you
Yeah,
tickets to our first concert when we reopen.
yeah, no, I like
Very
it.
excited.
I'm not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person.
Yes, so am
Yeah,
I.
yeah.
You know,
So
the nice thing about this is you don't have to be religious to
yeah,
access the power and humanity and
correct. Yeah,
beauty of the music.
right.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
music is above and beyond any kind of theory or ideology or dogma, I find.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good to know. I
Yeah,
want to switch the gear now to a different gear from
sure.
pandemic vaccination. I want to jump to social media.
Yes,
A very interesting topic.
very.
So currently on social media, we are seeing an increase in hate messages being posted. Do you think, in the name of freedom of speech, it is acceptable?
That's really a difficult question, you know, as I really believe freedom of speech is very, very important. And maybe that's partly because of this American background or my journalist background. But I feel that if you don't have a marketplace of ideas where people can say what they think, then you have a real problem because then people can't decide the difference between a good idea and a bad idea. So I'm very wary of people who say things like, this is too offensive a comment and it's not
Mhm.
up for debate.
Right,
Because I think, well, anybody could say that about anything.
right.
And I don't like the idea of anybody arbitrating what can be not up for debate or not. So I tend to take the view that even something that I personally find repulsive and repugnant
Mhm,
ought to be not illegal.
mhm,
That said, Canada has hate speech laws.
mhm,
I think they're pretty good in terms of finding the line between advocating harm to certain groups and
mhm,
creating hatred against them
mhm,
versus allowing freedom of speech.
mhm,
Sometimes that may put us in a situation that's uncomfortable, but I think the alternative is actually worse.
mhm. Like for me, the way I say is, social media, it's a good platform to, spread all the words, messages.
Yeah.
Uh, Canada, that way, it's much better compared to other parts of the world. I see a lot of, partisan, left, right, center politics
Yeah.
going on. The other thing I find, which I personally don't like, is a lot of politicians in Canada, they tend to block social media users because they don't like certain things, which I
Right.
personally think there should be a legislation here. I think in US they have a law now that elected representative cannot block social media users unless it's a hate message, those kind of things.
Really, that's interesting. Yes, I mean, I think elected officials ought to be open to comments from people. I don't know. I mean, everybody's got their line in the sand. Sometimes I'll write something and people will make really nasty, ugly attacks on me in social media. And then that means, for me, that means that I've learned to just shut it,
Yeah,
not go on it for a few days so I can rest. I
yeah,
think the trouble with social media is it's one person once described it to me, especially Twitter,
mhm,
as somebody writing something horrible on a bathroom wall, and you never know who they are, and they're
right.
not accountable for their position. So,
Mhm,
one of the things I find so awful about social media is that people don't give their real names. You don't know who they are. They say these horrible things about you, and they don't even have the courage to speak up. So I don't think you can legislate that people aren't rude. They have to be polite. I mean, you can certainly join groups on Facebook where moderators and administrators will make sure that nobody's rude, and those are
mhm,
much more comfortable to be on. And
mhm,
I find that the social media is fine, but as soon as you get into a political subject, it's like it's horrible. It's
yeah.
everybody's a predator, and everybody's trying to make you feel awful, and it can
Right.
be really bad for your mental health to be on there.
I
So
think you need to have thick skin. On Twitter, I'm on Twitter. I get a lot of trolls saying this thing. When I read, I laugh. I
yeah,
love it.
yeah,
You have to have thick skin. If you have become very sensitive, and you
Yeah.
take it personally, then it becomes hard. Initially, it was tough
Yeah.
because you were not used to it. Now, after all this trolls saying this, that you are this, you are in this political party, you're that political. Now I laugh and I enjoy.
Good for
I
you.
always feel they are the fans, right?
Good for
They're
you.
trolling,
That's wonderful. You should
right?
give a class
All
on
I do is
how to grow a thicker
if,
skin.
even if
I would join it.
yeah, even if somebody is abusing, I just put a mute notification. That's all it is. I don't block,
That's good for you. Yeah. No, I've
right?
never blocked anybody because I think they'd make a big issue out of it. Look
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
blocked me, look who's, you know. I
But
find it
one thing I like to see is on the
okay.
social media. At least I personally feel um, all the accounts should be verified now, just like Twitter. Twitter right now only verifies, I think, only celebrities or based on the followers. I
Yeah.
think if we have a verified Twitter or Facebook, you will see less of abuse. I think a lot of times these are fake accounts. They just created, sending negative things and all those things. So that's
Yes.
other thing.
You're right. There's a lot of fake accounts. And I think, too, when you don't have to show your face,
Yeah,
you become a different person and not a
correct.
better person.
Right.
There are some times when people will write me a letter on email and they'll be so nasty. And
Yeah,
I'll write back very politely, thank you. Obviously, you feel concerned about this, and this is why I wrote it this way. And then sometimes they'll write back and they'll be so apologetic and they'll say,
right.
they'll suddenly realize that a real person had to read all these abusive things
Hmm.
and wrote back to them, and they'll feel ashamed of themselves.
Hmm.
That happens once in a while. But so I think anything that takes away the mask and forces people to look into each other's eyes.
Yeah,
There's a reason people aren't as rude to each other when they're sitting down face to face
correct.
and see each other's faces.
Yeah.
That
No, that's different. Yeah, a lot of times, people who are on social media saying something when you may meet them in person, totally different.
they're totally different. And a teacher once told me that one of their tricks was when an angry parent would come in, they were angry about something the teacher had done for their child. The first thing the teacher would do is pull out a chair and say, "Why don't you have a seat and we'll talk?" And
Hmm.
that the act of sitting down together immediately reduces the rage. It's
Hmm.
very interesting because, yeah, you
Yeah.
can't do battle when you're sitting down.
So my next question on this topic itself is: do you think social media platforms should be suspended 1 month before election to reduce the impact of fake news and propaganda on voters?
No,
Okay.
I believe there's a risk of fake news and propaganda, but
Mhm.
I think to suspend social media accounts
Mhm.
when they're an important part of how we communicate, I think that creates even more problems than it solves.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's just me, free
Because
speech.
I feel just before election, depends which country. In Canada, the politics start taking shape probably 3 months before election. US and a lot of other countries start taking, it gets heated up probably a year before,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of misleading information. And today,
Yes.
people are reading less of print media and more of a digital, right? So the
Yes, that's right.
information, they're bombarded, and this fake new, messages about the other opposition party, all those things, distract them and can change the voting pattern, right?
I agree. I agree. And I think though that the paper media, that like the newspaper I work for, has always had this problem right before elections. Somebody will tell you something scandalous about somebody else, and it's
Mhm.
right before the election, and you say to
Yeah,
yourself, even if I could prove that it's true, is there enough time for the person to respond and
correct,
everybody to take in the response? And
correct.
and so we really, have to agonize about those stories
So you
because
can always make an allegation, right? It's very before the election, you don't have time. Allegation is allegation, right? Somebody
right.
accuses for something, right?
But what if it's true and people would have voted differently if they knew?
Yeah.
Sometimes this information just comes out right before the election, then you have to decide what to do with it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, in the traditional media like ourselves or the TV news or the radio, we we exercise a kind of decision making power over what we're going to say and what we're not going to say. And in social media, everybody says whatever they want. So
Mhm.
it's two different arenas with very different rules, and I think people just have to understand what that is
Mhm.
and take it for what it is. The great thing about social media is you can get information out very quickly and it's unfiltered.
Mhm.
So if you're a candidate who feels that the mainstream media don't really are constantly distorting what you're trying to say,
Mhm.
maybe because they don't like it, you
Mhm.
can go straight to your viewers. And you know who used that very effectively was Barack Obama.
Mhm.
So
We
sometimes
miss him. Where is Barack Obama? We need him.
right? And he used social media really well. And
Yeah.
so did Trump. So, it's like it reminds me of fire. It's a good servant, but a bad master. So you just have to make sure that you're in control of what you're saying or you can't control what people are saying about you, but you can control your response and you can reach
I-
people. So,
It's very interesting. Obama said we can. Trump said let's make America great again, and now we know what happened, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right. I
Right.
it's that's a whole other subject.
Yeah. Okay, so we covered pandemic, vaccination, impact of social media. Now let's get to the national and provincial politics.
Okay.
So I want to ask you, what's your take on the Trudeau government so far? How would you rate them? 1 to 10. 10 means they are doing extremely good job, and yeah, you can respond to that.
You mean for everything or for the
In
pandemic?
general, overall, so far, including pandemic, everything so far. How would you rate them 1 to 10?
I think the Trudeau government has missed a lot of opportunities to do some really good things.
Mm-hmm.
Oops. So I would say I would give them maybe a 4 out of 10, and it would be lower than that, but I think that they
Mm-hmm.
did respond very well at the beginning of the pandemic. I
Mm-hmm.
think the action to make sure that money got out to people quickly,
Mm-hmm.
in stark contrast to the kind of dreadful delays that we've seen in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've been wonderful about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think other times his mouth says one thing and the government does another,
Okay.
So I think, for example, he talked about doing something about global warming, which is still a really big problem. And it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
gone away just because we're distracted by the pandemic. But he hasn't really done very much to
Mm-hmm.
change the country's contribution to greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as planting all the trees that he said he was going to plant. Then you see it's going to be over 10
Mm-hmm.
years. Well, he could do it right now. He could pay people to go out and plant trees. Well, not right now,
Correct.
but
Yeah.
when it's warmer, he could do that. And a lot of other things. The SNC Lavalin scandal I found really
Mm-hmm.
repugnant. He spent a lot of time and energy legalizing marijuana, which,
Mm-hmm.
okay, there's so many more important things. So I'm not thrilled with that
Mm-hmm.
government, and I think he relied a lot on his personal charm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Correct.
always suspicious of people who rely on their personal charm.
Right.
I'd
Right.
rather have somebody who is glum and unfriendly, but actually did some good things.
Right. 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 I think that's all part of the photo op publicity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So it's all about messaging, about leadership. But during the pandemic, any specific policy-wise, you think they did something good or something they could have done differently, especially for a small business, right?
Well, I think small business has really been under siege in the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and I think Trudeau could have supplied more for small business.
Mm-hmm.
I know owners of small businesses who are just beside themselves
Mm-hmm.
and who are just hanging on with everything they have. And I have a lot of admiration for people that run their own business.
Correct.
But I think that's also the job of the provincial government as
Yeah.
well, not just
Yeah.
Trudeau. No, I
Correct.
do think Trudeau managed the flow of funds to people at the beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
He managed that really well.
The $2,000. Yeah.
Yeah, the CERB.
Right. Right.
It was very easy to get, and he made the decision that he was going to make it easy to apply for.
Right.
And even if some people got it who shouldn't get it, they would
Correct. Yeah.
figure that out with the taxes later. I thought that
Right.
was totally the right call.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think initially it's about giving money, right? Less of bureaucracy, hand it over. Then
Yeah,
later on, figure it out who got it,
figure
who's
it out
supposed to.
later. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So
So
you'd give 4 to 10?
4.
4, okay.
What
That
about you? What would you give him?
I would give the almost the same 4, 5. Right. What I like to say is, like I think we were talking earlier, right? When there is a crisis, a pandemic, that is the best time to show your leadership. This is the
Yes,
best time. Make use of it, right?
yes, yes.
And whoever is able to go through this crisis and able to figure out the issue, you don't have to be 100%. I think none of the government should even think of making it a perfect solution, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So speed wise, I see even in vaccination, I personally feel on the vaccination side, probably they were misleading the people. Probably the agreement already said that you will get more vaccination March 2021, and that was the primary reason the government didn't even want to disclose the contract with opposition.
right, right,
Because if they disclose that the contract, so probably they were just giving a false hope to the Canadians. We'll get it. We are talking to them. We are talking to the CEO. But I think the agreement said starting March 2021, that's when we're gonna get more batches of vaccination.
right. Well, he has said, right, that every Canadian that wants a vaccination will get it. Now, he said by September.
Yeah. And
So I think a
yeah.
lot of people are waiting and they're saying, okay, so the supply is jammed up now, but it's going to be flowing more strongly later. I
Right.
think people are going to wait until September. And then if he kept his promise, great. And if he didn't, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, they're buying time because that's the reason the prime minister said the pharma companies are not in violation of the contract. So that clearly says the contract says you will get it before March,
Yeah. Okay.
right? If
All right.
if the contract said you will get it in January, February, that means it's a breach of contract. They didn't,
Right.
so that means I think the government was misleading the Canadians
Yes.
just to
And
give
then
them
we'll have
comfort,
to see
false hope, right?
if the companies don't give us what we are contracted to have
Right.
because somebody else put the thumbs to them or offered them a higher price. We'll see
Right.
what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Duckford at the provincial level, 1 to 10? What they have done good, what they could have done better, what is the worst part they have done?
Oh boy, Doug Ford. That's a tough one because he's so strange,
Mhm.
he makes a terrible mistake and then he fixes it and then he goes and
Correct.
makes another mistake. And some of the time your heart goes out to him because he really seems outraged by something bad that's happened. Like when he was saying that when we were out of personal protective equipment at the beginning of the pandemic and he said, "We're never going to let this happen again."
Mhm.
You feel that he's on your side and he understands what you're going through. But then, where are the plans to build a plant that's going to make that kind of equipment? I don't know if it's there. I mean, there are some things that Doug Ford is getting yelled at about that I know are impossible to achieve. For
Mhm.
example, the teachers and the NDP have said you should have 15 students in a class
Yeah.
and instead of 30, and that would make schools safer. And we all know that's true. But having talked to the local school board, that would not only be prohibitively expensive, but also you wouldn't be able to find that much space. I mean, that basically means doubling the size of every school,
Mhm.
right? And how are you going to do that? And there's no real plan. So when people yell at him over, you're sending kids to school and there's not 6 feet between them, I get that. But
Mhm.
the answer is like it is impossible to do some of the things, and everybody knows it's impossible.
Right.
But
It's
they're
not
still
realistic.
yelling at
Yeah.
him.
Not you cannot have a perfect distancing, especially kids. Can't expect them.
Right. And I think, but for example, Doug Ford has done a really unconscionable thing when he said, yes, we're going to have better care in long-term care homes, but it doesn't start until 2025, where
Mhm.
there's going to be more hours per elderly resident for the elderly residents to have more time with a caregiver to
Mhm.
help them eat and to help them go for a walk or whatever they need to do. It's going to go up from, I think, 2.75 hours to 4 hours, I think is what it is.
Mhm.
So why isn't that happening now? Why are we waiting until 2025?
Mhm.
So I think he's this odd mixture of really likable human guy
Mhm.
who has a good heart
Mhm.
and policies that are really uncaring. When you just look at the policy and you strip it of the personality, they're
Yeah.
uncaring.
Split personality, I would call Duckford in a
Yes, I
confusion
quite
sometimes,
agree. I quite agree.
right?
So
It's
I
confusion, right? One
yes.
side he has a good, on the other side he is very brutal. If you speak against, you'll be thrown out of the party.
Oh yes. Like remember how he acted before
Yeah.
he got into power?
Yeah.
Remember what he did to our own Mike Harris?
Correct. Yeah.
Michael Harris?
Yeah.
I thought I would never forgive him for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
A
gets a
lot of other people, right? Or a lot of other MPPs too. Brenda, you know.
Corrales. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with her, I mean, that made more sense because she disagreed with a core policy of his, and
Yeah.
she didn't
Yeah.
tell him what was going on. Like, I don't blame him for kicking her out
Yeah.
because she and Jim are a whole different thing. But
Yeah.
but forcing Michael Harris out of his position to give another person called Michael Harris the
Yeah.
job
Yeah.
seems perfectly nice. But I mean, what they did to
Strategically.
the original Michael Harris was awful. That showed me that he has actually kind of a not nice inside. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Now I know Michael Harris. I used to keep in touch with him a few years back. The current Mike Harris, what I like about him is he's very interactive.
Yeah.
He responds. I like politicians to respond. A lot of people don't even respond. They don't care. They just start doing things just before election. Ha ha he hoo
Yeah.
hoo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Couple of photo ops. So Mike Harris that way I like because it's very interactive. One
Yeah.
thing I like about the Duckford government was just when the pandemic happened. I thought there'll be a lot of fighting between the province and the federal government because they both are from the different party. But I think there was a common sense agreement between the prime minister and the premier Duckford. So they
Yes,
did fight during the pandemic, which was really good,
that's true. Yeah, he's
right?
done some things very well.
Yeah.
But
Okay. So how you want to rate 1 to 10?
Doug Ford,
Yeah,
I'm giving him a 3 out of 10. It would be a 4, but then I'm very upset with him over what he did to the original Michael Harris, who I thought
Michael.
was an excellent MPP
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
and would probably be in cabinet right now as Minister of Transportation or something like that. Had
My
that
inside sources tell me Mike Harris may run for chair.
maybe
My
we'll see.
sources tell me. I don't know whether it's official,
I
confirmed.
don't have the same sources that you do. Maybe we should have a chat after this is over.
Right? So I know that is a plan. He's a regional councillor now. I think he did a good job on the tender side. We'll talk about that. So my final topic is just a quick time check. We
Yes,
have
he's a natural leader, actually, Michael Harris. He should be in a leadership position. I
yeah.
agree.
I
Yeah.
will. I'll talk about something later on offline.
Yeah.
A
Okay.
couple of things.
All
That
right.
brings me to the last topic, which is the municipality. Right? We just
Yeah.
have 10 minutes. We'll cover that. The one thing I want to ask you is about recently there was a petition call for the city of Waterloo to allow backyard fire. What's your take on this? Should the city allow this, and why we don't have one single bylaw across tri cities? Like why we have different rules for different cities? Because people are people.
That's right. Well, in Kitchener, backyard fires are allowed if you have enough distance between yourself and your neighbor. I myself am not a fan of backyard fires within cities because people live so close together. I have friends who had somebody next door light backyard fires, and not only did that mean that the soot was bothering them and they had to keep their windows closed in the summer, but also because the yards are close together, the fire almost set fire to their fence and their property.
Hmm.
So I tend to think that if you want to have chickens and you want to have fires, you shouldn't live in the city. You should live in the country. And I put
They're
chickens.
talking about making a barbecue then, right? If you have a chicken
Well,
and
maybe.
fire.
But some people want to have chickens in the city, and I just think
Yeah, yeah, I know.
it's when humans get too close to animals and there
Correct.
isn't the proper protection. I mean, that's how we've ended up probably with this coronavirus, and so
Mhm.
many other pandemics have been the same. So I think it's good to have that out in the country where there's lots of room. And but you're quite right that it's odd that each municipality has its own rules. And I think, of course, that goes back to regional reform and the push we've seen over many, many decades for Waterloo Region to be one city, the way Hamilton is,
Mhm.
and how Hamilton has experienced good and bad things about that. But one thing you do get is a complete clarity over who you're supposed to call and what the rules are. You don't have any of this, oh, well, this city's plowed, this street is plowed by the city, but this curb belongs to the region. So if you want to fix it, you have to call that. It's very confusing, and it's not good for anybody to be confused about government.
So would you support one bylaw in three cities? Like, why can't we have even the parking, everything? Like, why there has to be,
Um, I think it would be better if Waterloo Region was one municipality. It would be better on a lot of levels. But I
Mhm,
think it would upset a lot of people,
mhm,
especially people in Cambridge would be very upset about that.
mhm.
And
Yep, yeah.
so, yeah, so I think there's pluses and minuses to it. I
Mhm,
was quite sure that there was going to be one city, and
mhm,
that Doug Ford was going to impose that. And
mhm,
I don't know what's in the report that Ken Sealing and the other fellow, whose name I forget, sorry,
mhm.
um, they submitted a report, and I don't know what's in that report, and nobody has been told.
Correct, yeah.
But
Secret,
it's a secret
confidential.
report. You know, people's money went to pay for all the research, but it's a secret report. Okay. I don't know what's in it, but I suspect it suggested that there could be some gradual harmonizing.
Mhm.
But I think just to the extent that people who are coming in now are people from the GTA who are buying the homes and who are moving in, I think there'll be less and less concern about this city or that city, and the amalgamation will finally come, and we will finally have, maybe in 20 years, maybe we will have a law that says, it'll be one law for everybody about fires in the backyard and all
Mhm,
kinds of other things. Eventually that will happen. But I
mhm.
don't, but I obviously not going to happen in the next couple of years.
Okay.
But it
So
will.
yeah. So my last question is, uh, what are the important issues that the region is facing according to you? For me, I'm very passionate about affordable housing thing. I would say it should be declared a crisis. There is no, like, eight 500,000 house being sold for 800,000. What is this? Like, it's outrageous. I think in last 3 or 4 years, it has gone up by 40% or something.
Yeah.
Housing is a big thing. Childcare, I'm very passionate about. What is your overall take? Which issues are like important, very high priority?
So I think that the price of housing is the most important thing that the municipality needs to be dealing with. And the municipality has a lot of control over this because,
Mhm.
when the light rail came in, all these condominium towers went up. And there was an opportunity at that time for the municipalities to say 10% of this housing has to be affordable.
Correct.
And they didn't do that. They instead, the developer would say, well, we want to go 4 stories higher than we're allowed, so we'll build you a piece of public art. So now we've got, a bunch of gorillas holding a phone, and there's a statue of that in Waterloo, and that's the public art. But that doesn't really help anybody pay the rent.
Mhm,
And so as the prices have been going up and up, I think we absolutely have to make sure that our
mhm,
city is affordable for people who need to be able to live here too. We can't just have it be a city for the rich.
mhm,
And that's what it's becoming. And we need
mhm,
to stop that right now
mhm,
and make sure that we devote the money to
mhm,
affordable homes that are
mhm,
properly not something that somebody says is affordable and then everybody forgets about it, but something
mhm,
that's on a registry that you can apply to live in,
mhm,
that is monitored by the government. And I think the government
mhm,
has to find a way to do that and work with the developers. We have
mhm.
another, I mean, we have a stage 2 coming to light rail. If it ever happens, I hope they learn from the mistakes of the first time, because they did make the mistake of not insisting that it be affordable.
Yeah, that's a big, affordable. I think it'll take many years. I think until unless it's not made an emergency top priority, I think it will remain like that. It's very hard for people to buy now, like especially the first-time home buyers.
Right. So, I mean, for example, there are organizations like Habitat for Humanity and Menno Homes, which create built homes for ownership and for rental. And
Mhm,
they do it on a nonprofit basis for people on lower incomes. And we need to make sure that they get enormous infusions of funds and that they get the opportunity to grow or to replicate themselves, because they do a really good, both of those organizations do a really good job. at making sure that homes are inexpensive, and we need to be open for people of every income and not just people with money. Or we're going to really we're gonna have a problem if we don't. We're gonna have people who've lived here all their lives getting really angry with the new people who are coming in because they're raising the housing prices.
Yeah.
A
The
friend
other
told
issue
me
is about the
the same thing
childcare.
happened in Stratford. Pardon me?
Sorry, go ahead.
A friend told me today that the exact same thing happened in Stratford in the 1990s and early 2000s, when a lot of people from Toronto bought summer homes out there because of the festival. And then people who had lived there, the prices went up and people who had lived there couldn't afford a home, and it turned them against the newcomers. We don't want to be a community that doesn't want to have newcomers here.
Right.
And we want our children and our grandchildren to be able to afford a home of their own, just like we have. So
I
we
think
have.
there has to be a coordination. The way I see a lot of the one of the reasons for this unaffordable housing crisis is one is the mass immigration. Based on that, there has to be a coordination between the federal government, the province, and the municipality. Okay, this year we're gonna get this many people. We should do some sort of a survey where you should ask people, okay, where do you want to stay? So let's say if they pick Toronto, we need to have enough inventory for the people to have an affordable housing. I think there's a lack of coordination, and now
Mhm.
Mississauga is saturated. Milton, everyone is saturated. They're all coming here now. I think within 5 years, this region will be saturated. Then it's the traffic is being pushed to other cities now.
That's true. That's true.
A lot of people also buying housing as an investment property, right? So I know a lot of people, they buy second home, rent it out, and that's another factor. So there has to be coordination, I think. Otherwise, Canada, second largest country in the world, there's so much land. I don't see any reason why house prices here is far more than America. In America, for 300,000, you can get a big bungalow.
I know. Actually, my son's interested in construction, and he interviewed a man in Detroit who built a house for $500, bought a
Right.
house for $500, and fixed it up. So yes, you're quite right that in the United States the homes are more reasonable, 100%.
Okay. So I
So
just want to end the conversation with the last topic, which is the childcare. Like, what do you think? I think $1,000 is too expensive. I think we should be able to have a childcare which basically with a $500 per month fee. I don't know why the childcare is so expensive, and that basically discourages, especially females, to join the workforce.
yes, well, childcare is very expensive. It's always been very expensive, and it's because you want to have well-trained people looking after children, and you want to have enough of the people that they can make sure the children are safe and well guided and learning things. So, for example, I think it's one caregiver to 5 toddlers, for example, kids that are between 18 months and 2.5 years old. So that's one reason childcare is so expensive if you get professional childcare.
Mhm.
Um, Now, in some countries, the government subsidizes that. Like in
Right.
Quebec, they subsidize the childcare, and you're able to get it for very inexpensive, so that the women can go into the workforce. And they found that when they did that, the taxes that the women paid for the subsidies to childcare.
Correct. Exactly.
Yes. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things we haven't talked about is how this particular pandemic has been so hard on women, and many of the jobs that have been
Correct.
lost have been women's jobs, and women having, when their children have to stay home, then usually in the family it makes the most sense for the woman to stay with the child, not the man, or they're a single parent, they don't have a choice. So then you have those women losing their jobs. So we need to do something to build women's careers up, because decades of progress has been lost for many women,
Right.
and we need to build that up. And also, high quality childcare is a really good way. It's a really good investment, because you spend it when the child's young, and then it keeps doing good things for you throughout that child's lifetime. So it's a better investment than investing in older people. So
That's all the question I have. We covered a lot of topic, and I really
we
enjoyed
did.
this conversation, right?
I did too. It's been lovely to chat with you for longer. And
Yeah, thank you so much.
I just want to
Uh,
say how much I appreciated your Namaste debates. When I walked in there, it was wonderful to
okay,
see
thank you so much.
South Asian people saying, "Okay, we want to enter the world of politics." I thought that was just magnificent. I
Yeah.
hope you keep this up. I do.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Thanks for accepting my invite. We'll talk some other time. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining Namaste Debate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.